I'm going to start introducing our next panel of speakers. The next one is going to be quite interesting because we have two speakers, not one, but two. So it's going to be highly interactive throughout the entire session. These two speakers coming up, they come from two of the most major exporters of Ceylon tea in the world. Rehan Amarasuriya is the CEO of Tea Tang, and Imran Akbar is one of the directors of the Akbar group of companies, and I will be inviting them to share a bit more about themselves for starters. And what they're going to talk to us about is, we know in the tea industry, there's a lot of resistance because the experts know the way things have been done over the last few centuries, and people are sometimes a bit slow to embrace change and technology. But we have seen that COVID, with massive disruptions, has brought about that nudge and impetus that might be very needful. So they're going to share a bit more about what they have done in their respective spheres of influence along the supply chain to adopt tech. All right, Rehan and Imran, if you could unmute yourselves. Perhaps let's start with Rehan. Rehan, tell us a bit more about yourself, about the companies that you manage.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Rehan Amarasuriya. I was actually born in Singapore and I grew up in Singapore, but my founding fathers of my family business come from Galle in Sri Lanka, in the south of Sri Lanka. We are a five generation old company, and tea has been part of the family business for all these generations. And from managing and owning plantations in the earlier generations, we started an export company in 1979 called Tea Tang, and today we also have some retail brands that I manage in Singapore. So the family has been involved in tea for a long time, and I studied finance in Melbourne, and my journey in tea started when I came back to Singapore when my dad sent me to Sri Lanka for 3 months. And I spent time on plantation, and I spent time with the brokers in the auction and with my team in Tea Tang itself. And it was really fascinating, and I got deeper and deeper into this business. And now, although our family business is very diverse, I've told my dad that I just want to focus on tea. I love tea, and yeah, I'm really excited and always looking at innovation. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Rehan. Imran, how about yourself and Akbar Brothers?
So good afternoon, everyone. So much like Rehan, I too come from a family business. To give you all a bit of insight into Akbar Brothers, we are a 50-year-old company. We just turned 50 last year. We are predominantly tea company, but much like Rehan's company, we have diversified into many other interests, such as renewable energy, emission testing, pharmaceuticals, and quite a few other industries. Having said that, tea very much remains the core of the business. Our family has been in tea for 5 generations now. I'm the 5th generation to be involved in tea since 1907, so yeah, over 100 years now. And our tea business predominantly focuses, I mean, we're very much still focused on the conventional tea, the conventional black tea exports to the Middle East and various other parts of the world. For the last 28 years, we've been the largest exporters of tea in Sri Lanka. And now we're looking at some other new niche areas. I guess my main focus and my key role in the business is driving the retail strategy and the direct-to-consumer strategy going forward, and looking at some new ways, some new innovations purely in the tea sector, which have either been overlooked in recent years, or we just haven't considered them so far. So and this is pretty much going to be the sort of area I focus on in my presentation today. And thank you very much for having me.
Wow, thank you, Imran. I think it's not every day that we get people that have been in the business for more than 100 years across generations. So perhaps, Imran, you might be best placed to answer this question. How has the pandemic really hindered or disrupted your ways of doing business? Is this one of the toughest times you would say you have seen in recent years?
So that's a really good question. I mean, I think for me, 100%. I mean, I've only been in the business not even 4 years now. But for me, hands down, it's been the toughest challenge so far. Speaking to my uncles and my grandfather who've been in business for some 40, 50 years odd, I think they would argue that this is probably top three greatest challenges. And mind you, this is a country that's been through a 26-year civil war and numerous other threats over the years, insurrections, you name it, we've been through it all. So it's definitely, I'd say, up there in terms of challenges. Our ways of doing business, I mean, I don't think we've ever seen such a drastic approach. And I think the unique, such a drastic change in approach. And I think what was really challenging for the tea industry, and I think Rehan can vouch for the same thing, is that we didn't get that transition sort of reflection period that a lot of companies got when they initially went into lockdown, because, you know, they're working from home, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we didn't really get that opportunity. I mean, from day one after the lockdown, we were expected to report to work. We were given lockdown passes, and tea was declared pretty much an essential export service by the Sri Lankan government right from the start. I guess it was very much a case of learning on the job, learning. I mean, I must have been doing 1 or 2 Zoom webinars a day, from, you know, learning from leading CEOs around the world as to how they were coping with, I mean, on the one side, the health, the occupational health and safety side. On the other side, it was more the moral side. I mean, we've got, you know, when you have large teams you're working with who are demotivated, who are thinking about job security, who have maybe 10 or 20 other priorities before the actual work is concerned. It really was a challenging and trying time, a true test, I think, for any leader in any industry. And in terms of tea in particular being affected by COVID, I mean, it's been reported it's now almost common knowledge. I mean, from a demand side, tea was actually positively affected by the pandemic from a demand side. I mean, but I think that's where the positives end, because yes, there was plenty of demand, but practically speaking, serving these customers, taking into account the logistical constraints, the new rules and, you know, WHO guidelines that we had to adhere to, with no training, no transition period, so to speak. It was just like on the job the next day. It's time to adapt. It was really a lot of impulsive decisions had to be made, because the instructions and the guidelines we were getting from authorities and from the rest of the world were so last minute. And I don't think anybody was to blame. It was such an unprecedented, you know, turn of events. And kudos to the
I think we're losing Imran a little. Let's see if he comes back. Okay. I think we're losing Imran a little.
You know, in regards to transportation and so many things.
Wonderful. Imran, could you just repeat the last 2 sentences, because we lost you for a while? All right.
Sorry?
I think we lost you for a while. Now we can, but you're frozen. Do you want to repeat your last 2 sentences? Or
sorry. Okay, sure.
Great.
Sure. So 1 second, I'll just change my connection. It might. 1 second.
Sure. You know, while Imran's doing that, Rehan, I'm sure you have plenty to add from your perspective and your own experience.
So, like Imran said, I mean, what he faces and what we at Tea Tang face, it would have been very similar. I mean, obviously, I really wanted to be in Sri Lanka. I think I remember when COVID was just starting, my dad was, you know, I really wanted to fly to Sri Lanka, and my dad was like, no, it's getting serious, you better not fly. Because to me, I never thought that the airlines would stop. And, you know, it was like a week later and the airline stopped and the whole thing got so serious. And, you know, it was really using technology to communicate with the teams, because, you know, in an ideal situation, a CEO should be very close to the people, and I wasn't able to. And we compensated that with technology. And even, you know, my dad, who never liked all these web meetings, he's always like, you know, you should meet face to face, you know, that's the way. And even I could see him seeing the value of using engaging technology. And like Imran said, you know, it was very tough, because I think the Sri Lankan government did a good job though, because I think the damage would have been very bad if we had stopped the supplies, because Sri Lanka supplies about 300 million kilos annually. So every month, it's a fair amount of tea that's being supplied, and we are very critical part of a lot of businesses globally. So if we shut down, it's a very bad, it'll create a lot of problems. So I think it was a good decision, but like Imran said, it was really a balance, because you're trying to keep your staff safe, but at the same time, operation still has to continue. It was very challenging, but it's during these challenges where you really see also how the teams come together, and how you can kind of see the leaders and the pillars of the company. So for me, it was a very good experience, and I'm glad to say that the team did fantastically, and none of the shipments were delayed, and it's a great testament. And I think the whole country, I think on the tea side, everyone was pushing very hard still, and but I'm glad to say, touch wood, everyone's safe.
Right. Let's build a bit upon that. I think we don't know whether it's a good thing or bad thing that tea is so essential that you guys all had to go back to work on day one and learn on the job. But I think a critical concern must always have been the safety of your staff on the ground, and the safety of your partners dealing with them. I was hoping that let's maybe talk about, both of you spoke about it being very challenging. What would you say were the top 3 biggest challenges you faced during this period? I think Imran also mentioned logistics. Both of you mentioned management. What are the top 3 challenges? And correspondingly, what concrete actions did you take to respond to these challenges? And what were the results?
Yeah, maybe I'll just touch on the management part of it. So in terms of management, keeping a very close, I think communication, always keeping very open communication lines. And I think checking down the line as well as a leader, like I think it's easy to sort of operate a business. Not easy, I would say it's sometimes what happens is you operate through maybe the next layer of management. But what I try to do generally in most of my businesses is I try to really reach out to really the sort of the lowest level of staff to get a sense of what's going on the ground, because I think it's very easy to get distant from that, especially during a crisis. So trying to reach out to different layers of the team is very, very important, and keeping the communication constant. So checking in on the team on a consistent basis, and we have to think as a team. It's not, I mean, I might be the leader of this company, but I don't have all the answers. Getting that sense of a team spirit where we address problems as a group is very important. So yeah, I guess that's, and I guess for me, because I wasn't present, I really needed to leverage technology. So whether it was WhatsApp, whether it was email, whether it was Skype, whether it was Google Meets, I guess really leveraging on technology really helped, because if there wasn't technology, I think I would have been very hard for me to manage this business through this period, and certain critical calls for me to take.
That's right. Question. I mean, I think some of this management best practices you were probably already doing pre-COVID, but as COVID kind of accelerated it, and in a way the technology was there, are you going to keep that moving out?
Yeah, so the technology was always there, but I don't think we moved so quickly. I think we were engaging on some of our businesses, we're starting to engage, WhatsApp and WeChat, and, we're using different platforms to do our business. But like, I think the push, and it only has been in a certain part of the business, but I think it really accelerates that change where the whole mindset has to change, and sometimes it's very tough with tea businesses because, like Imran said, they're multi-generational. So there's a lot of like legacy. So there are a lot of legacy systems. So how do you innovate in a system of legacy? That's a challenge.
Well, Imran, I think that's wonderful, Rehan. On that point, Imran, share a bit more about some of the legacy mindsets and systems that you had to overcome. And I think especially when you're working with your own family members, I think it gets even more complicated on that front. So share a bit more with us on the management front, please. So I think that's critical.
That's a brilliant question. I think, in fact, that would have been one of my top 3 greatest challenges if I look back at the last 3 months. More than legacy, more than I think family, it's just mindset. as a general overarching topic, I mean, in my personal experience, I mean, so I guess fortunately for me, I was on the ground and I was able to, even for the first 2 weeks, I was able to go to the factories and able to speak to some of the frontline workers, you know, who are the ones who have, I suppose, like Rehan very correctly said, they offer the greatest perspective because they're the ones, you know, going out there and they understand the practical issues, which sometimes you only hear from middle management, et cetera, you know, through a like a different lens perhaps. And at the start, I was able to physically go and see firsthand. I think in terms of mindset, one of the biggest challenges was sort of convincing people that, you know, we actually have to, in the long term, do something fundamental to change our way of thinking. Because a lot of people had this mentality like, oh, it's okay, boss. Once this all finishes, we'll go back to how things were before. And, you know, just give it a week or two. I'm sure restrictions will ease. And like, I had to be that, you know, that horrible guy who just like, in a very dystopian way, say, guys, this is not going to finish. And I even like, sometimes for effect, I would have to, I'd find myself, you know, sounding almost like a demagogue, you know, like trying to convince people that guys, this is here to stay. Either we get used to it or we just accept that, you know, we may as well shut the business or whatever. We found ourselves trying to be very dramatic in just getting the message across at the start, because there was a lot of resistance to do things differently. I mean, even to get some people to get on a Microsoft Teams meeting was tough. I mean, I have members of staff who have been in the company from the time my grandfather started the business with his brothers, and convincing them to use Zoom and Microsoft Teams was one of the toughest things. Not so much convincing them to use it, but convincing them that this was a very real and feasible and unfortunately mandatory way going forward, or mandatory way of working going forward, was a challenge. And I'm proud to say that amongst some of our very, very senior staff, we saw an amazing response. And there were some people who really, really drove change, and they were like the change leaders, I'd like to say, and did a phenomenal job. With some people, of course, it took a bit more time, but I guess that's how it is. I mean, I'm sure Rehan had a similar experience. You have some people who take change, they grab it, you know, they grab the bull by the horns, as we say, and, you know, persevere. And then some people need a bit more persuasion and sometimes, you know, force, and then they finally see things. So like I said, it's mindset. That's what I think it is.
Let's stay on this a bit more, because while a lot of people are dialing in with some interest in future of tea and coffee, I think more, if not every one of us, is dealing with change management, and mindset is so key. Quick question, if you were to go back and do it all over again, knowing what you know now about who your resistance points were and who your critical early adopters are, is there anything you would have done differently so that your process of adoption and embracing change would have been smoother? Anything at all? Any new insight you gained about?
I think having a culture that accepts and a culture of innovation. I think, you know, a lot of I think tea has the tendency of sort of being very slow to innovate. Just to give you an idea, so when I first came to Sri Lanka to stay on the, you know, to do my 3-month program, I went to a tea plantation and I looked at the factory, and the factory had machines which were designed 100 years ago. And to me, I couldn't understand why the process hadn't changed in 100 years. Then after that, I went to the auction system. So the auction, I believe, is one of the oldest auctions in the world, and it's over 100 years old. And it was amazing. There were 150 tea exporting companies sending 2 staff for 2 days every week to the auction. And they were sitting through a whole session, 2 full days of sessions to buy the tea. And they're all like writing on the same booklet. And to me, like, I was just like, you know, I was really shocked, and I was thinking, why couldn't we innovate? But guess what? During COVID, you know, the auction went online, and I was so happy. And I thought, you know, being in Singapore, I thought the auction was only going to be 2 weeks and then online, and then they're going to go back on offline. But I'm so happy to say that last week when I called my staff, they said it's still online. So Sri Lanka has been able to make the change.
So quick question, when they went online for digital auctions, were they still using the paper booklets though, or did they go into a more sophisticated data management?
So the thing is, from what I understand, all the information is on the platform. I mean, I haven't seen it for myself, but but my staff, I think they've all been so excited about it. But the thing is, okay, your question was, how will we do things differently? I think creating a culture where innovation is part of the DNA is so important, because no business can stay static. If you look at the past 50 years, if 50 years ago to get a company to $1 billion turnover would have taken, let's just say 50 years. Today, it takes much shorter time. And that's because of technological innovations and how fast we can get to the market. Therefore, change is happening much faster. So companies need to, that has to be a pillar, it has to be a facet of a company. The fact that innovation is part of our culture. And I think a lot of tea companies have not built this as a pillar, neither had we in our businesses. And that's something I'm working even in the group. So that innovation is a pillar of the future, because that when change needs to happen, then it's a lot more acceptable because it's part of the DNA.
Right. So it does sound like, you know, of course, we don't want something like a COVID to happen again.
No,
no, at all. Though I think the running joke about COVID being your chief transformation officer, it's very true for a lot of industries.
Very true.
I think that the question that no one else has a good answer for is, how do we then create proactively this culture of innovation? And I think we're still figuring that out. If Imran wanted to jump in on this point, before we got to the public question, but before we got there, wanted to, Gautam said, glad to let the speakers know that on the first International Tea Day, Assam in India also went in for their e-auction of tea. So that trend is going on.
We're all moving. Great.
Excellent.
So happy to hear that.
Imran, any final thoughts on the management culture of innovation before we go into the logistics, shipping, and auction front?
So that's also something you know, I've been sort of something that's been on my mind, you know, pre-COVID and then of course post-COVID. It's been the number one thing on my mind is, like Rehan said, I mean, with his experience visiting plantations and having seen that certain processes haven't changed in 100 years. I mean, I've seen this in so many aspects of the tea trade. I mean, our auction system, I think, has been, until it went online 3 months ago, I don't think there had been a significant material change in 126 years since the formation of the apex body of the tea industry, which is only about which took place about 25 years after the first tea plant was the first tea bush was planted in Sri Lanka. So I think the problem is, I feel in the tea industry, and I think Rehan can vouch for this, is there is this large notion amongst a lot of people, young and old, that, you know, the established order works really well, and there's really no need to change the status quo because it's worked for 100 years. So who are we to propose that, you know, there could be a better way of doing things? Because if you know, it's like the famous old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's sort of been the overarching mentality, I think, in most aspects of the trade. And it's funny, I think if it hadn't been for COVID-19, I'm not sure we would have transitioned to an online auction in my lifetime. And that's my honest opinion on this subject.
I think it was
unless you're forced to. It's like, sometimes it's like, unless your back is against a brick wall and like there's literally no other option, there isn't really a need for innovation, which is unfortunate. And I think, I mean, even if you take the start of the tea industry, it was very much, okay, I mean, in 1867, the entire coffee crop was disrupted by a blight or by a mass virus that basically killed the entire crop. And then people were forced to look for new things until a Scottish planter named James Taylor decided, why don't I try this new type of herb, which a shrub which he found in China. And then that's a whole different story. But what I mean is, like, it seems that unfortunately our backs are against the wall. There really is this uh, um, culture of not wanting to change, because it's always the case of people are afraid of being shot down when they speak up. And I've noticed this even at certain forums, you know, cross company, like certain bodies in Sri Lanka, where whenever we're asked to voice our opinions, it always boils down to like you'll always hear some amazing ideas. There's some really brilliant brands and companies in Sri Lanka that actually contradict this theory, but they haven't really been showcased in a way that would make you know, Ceylon tea stand out, you know, globally. And I think we are now starting to see that, you know, change at a very fundamental, radical, because it's really radical change that we're talking about. You know, when you change the fundamental nature of doing something, like for example, taking the auction online, the fact that we were able to implement it so successfully, and like Rehan correctly said, the fact that it's still happening is, I guess, an amazing glimmer of hope. And I think it certainly is like a bit of a wake-up call for all of us that, you know, we did it 3 months ago. Why can't we do something of this scale in another aspect of the tea industry? Maybe on the marketing side, maybe on the promotion side, maybe in the plantation side. You know, if one segment, one very crucial apex segment of the industry, the auction, was able to do it, the auction system, which is crucial. 99.9% of tea is sold through the auction. I mean, why can't we implement change elsewhere? So it's given me a newfound optimism for our industry, 100%.
Wow. So it does seem like, well, nobody wanted COVID to happen. The blessing in disguise was it kind of gave you that nudge, that desperate nudge that everybody needed to change. I think that lends very nicely to a question in the Q&A channel asking, it was posed to Imran, but I think Rehan, you can weigh in as well. What is one most crucial thing you wish to change in the tea industry? And I suppose along with it, how do you wish to sharpen and change your tea business in such an old industry?
Imran.
So, yeah, shall I go?
No, Imran, please go ahead first.
I for one firmly believe that in this particular area, I think brands themselves really need to start driving the change. I firmly believe that the wait and see approach and the hoping that authorities and regulatory bodies around the world will introduce policy, will you know, just by chance introduce policy that helps brand owners is completely you know, unrealistic. I think we have seen brands in Sri Lanka, in India, in Kenya, all over the world that have, in their own way, completely contradicted the traditional tea norm or model that 99.9% of the exporters or brand owners in those countries have used for, in our case, over 100 years. And I think seeing certain brands do things so fundamentally differently has given hope to other budding young entrepreneurs in the tea industry, and even some older companies, you know, who are internally trying to drive change, given them that glimmer of hope. I personally believe that going forward, if I take a long-term approach, you know, more than a year ahead, I firmly believe brands that, you know, play to the strengths of that particular country's tea in the best possible way, they'll that, coupled with a good story, coupled with a mission, coupled with vision and purpose, will see success. We have seen it. I mean, I always cite examples in India for a perfect example of how traditional models can be completely disrupted, and you know, multi-million-dollar brands can be created in a relatively short period of time, you know, 2 to 3 years. I always like to use the example of Tea Box in India. I mean, it's just unbelievable to see what they've achieved to sell tea direct to consumer to over 120 countries, with the promise of, you know, fresh tea, you know, from leaf to cup in a matter of 14 days. So I think we have seen examples of what tea can be Ceylon tea, other origins of tea, what they can be. And now it's just, I guess, when more and more larger corporations and young entrepreneurs, capitalize on this trend and, remain persistent through challenging periods like this. I think the sky is the limit. And I think that of course, I'm speaking from a marketing and promotion perspective. In terms of the actual process and the back end, maybe Rehan can add a bit to that.
Sure. I think I share very similar views to Imran. I think Sri Lanka really has to carve their niche a lot more. I think in the past, when the industry was starting, I think there was less competition. I think there's a lot more competition that Sri Lanka faces. And I think we need to carve our niche a lot more. And the brands, there needs to be, what I hope is that some, like Imran said, that some brands will emerge in the future, and that Ceylon really starts to understand and sort of focuses the efforts in carving the niche as a whole industry. That's on the sort of selling side. But I think for me, most importantly in tea is, it's actually the plucker's life. I would like to see that in my lifetime, how we can affect and change the tea plucker's life, because I think the story all begins there. And I think, not much has changed there. I think there's a lot of innovation that's happening across the supply chain, although it's been slow. But, when I first started in the tea plantation, I used to see where they live and, like how they're living and how things hadn't changed for them in many generations, and how we can lift them up along the way, and I guess that's something I want to see change globally, like how we address this as all the tea nations along the way is something that, it's a lifetime of work, but to me, that's the change I want to see in my lifetime.
Yeah, it does sound like it takes more than an individual brand or company innovation, whether it's from a marketing process, product point of view, but an industry-wide collaboration. Which brings me to my point, do you find that because of COVID, for example, the Sri Lankan Ceylon tea industry as a whole have had to band together and work together more closely?
Sorry, Imran, go ahead.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah, I think 100% we have noticed this. Yes. We've come together on many forums. We've collaborated. Even especially at the start of the pandemic, there was incredible collaboration between all stakeholders. A classic example, getting the auction online. There was a committee of people from all sectors within the entire tea supply chain who worked day and night to see that we could implement this in the time frame that we did, which was like a mammoth task, which many believed wouldn't have been possible. Even in terms of other things, when I think the unity shown by our tea industry in the post, like especially at the start of lockdown, was really incredible. And I think it restored a lot of faith to the naysayers who may have thought the industry is very divided, and who had their reasons, who had valid reasons to believe that the industry is divided on certain fronts, which it still is, of course. But when it really counts, we were able to get together in a way, and I'm sure other industries did as well. But of course, I can only speak from our industry. And I think going forward, I genuinely feel that there will be a lot more collaboration, because I think the whole notion of shared value and that we're better off, like we can do a lot more together than just individually has I think it's transcended older traditional companies. It's very much a reality and an accepted norm with the younger budding new entrepreneurs in tea. So I think in that particular sense, I think COVID has definitely brought us together in ways we hadn't, and I think many other industries would echo very similar sentiments. I would think.
Rehan, I wanted to pick up on your earlier point. That was great, Imran, from the industry-wide perspective. But Rehan, I wanted to go back to what you were talking about, improving the lives, not just innovation to improve profit margins of companies, but really going in the front of the supply chain, the growers' life. And tying that to what Imran said about purpose and mission, in telling the stories of your teas better. Could you share a bit more? I know you're also founder and CEO of the Clipper Tea. I'm not sure if you wanted to share some stories from there as well.
Yeah, so, I guess for me, I think about this tea business and, I'm really passionate about it. I'm thinking like, I have about 30 years, 40 years in my life. What do I want to achieve, right? So obviously creating great brands that are globally known will be definitely a facet. But more importantly, what change do I want to see? Like what sort of impact do I want to have? And to me, like the plucker has always been very close to my heart. And I felt like I had the ability to, through my innovation, through our entrepreneurship and through our businesses to help. One of the initiatives that we did, now it's been a while, but it was something where we actually created a program which we called Project Rediscover. Now, when you produce tea, the idea is that you're supposed to get the two tea leaves and the tea bud because they're the most supple leaf. They have the best flavor. But inevitably in the tea business, what happens is the pluckers pluck the third leaf and the fourth leaf because they get more volume, so they can produce more tea and they get paid more. But the quality kind of goes down. So the idea with Project Rediscover was to actually rediscover the Ceylon flavor and really keep a very high good leaf ratio. So the good leaf ratio is how many good leaves, 2 leaves and a bud you have in maybe 100 cuttings that you have. And the idea was to have a very high good leaf ratio, and we called it Project Rediscover. And what we did was we actually monitored the plucking of these teas and overlooked the manufacturer as well. But the idea was to really pay the plucker over and above. So let's just say the rate was 100 rupees a kilo. The idea was to pay 150 or 180, I can't remember, but there was a premium that was paid. The idea was that there was a benefit over and above, and for the plucker to give this very high quality of leaf that over and above compensated for that. So that was one of the first projects that we did to look at, sort of lifting the plucker. But after that, I also realized that it was actually this, the productivity of the plucker. I was thinking, how can we lift the productivity of the plucker? So I visited Japan and visited some of the plantations and looked at the technology that they have. And we also did a pilot project in Sri Lanka to see how we could produce different types of tea using Japanese technology as well. And I guess because they were all sort of pilot projects, we didn't like sink our teeth into a bigger project, but definitely there have been sort of attempts along the way to sort of engage with the plucker. Where we could improve their lives. But I really think that, going forward, we want to get more involved in that area and be closer to the plucker and seeing how we can innovate their lives. And I guess right now we don't have like this big project that we're working on, but there's small little projects that the company is doing, and we try to stay close to the pluckers. And it's a journey. And, the intention is there, and it's one of the pillars of the company. So, it's something that we will work on. It's, and like you said, it's not just me or Tea Tang. It has to be something that, is embraced by the whole world. How can we increase the productivity and, sort of share more with the plucker? And, it also, it's also what how the brands also position. So it's a whole chain that has to come together to make the story a reality. So, we're really at the early stage of this, but the intention is there to make that change, and, we are working on it.
Wonderful. Rehan, I love how you focus so much on improving the lives and productivities and well-being of the pluckers. I'm curious also, in so doing, was there actually an inadvertent positive impact on the profits and revenue of the business? Going back to what you said earlier.
So definitely. So we worked with some of our clients to share with them this project that we were doing, and they were very supportive. I mean, obviously the volumes were smaller than our usual business, but to me it was a step in the right direction. It was a step in that quality tea needs a higher price, and there's a certain price to pay for it, and to get the support of the companies was very positive. But I do feel it's still not a mainstream thing. It's still not affecting real change. And, it was a sort of a pilot project that we did. But the real success will come when we really start affecting, maybe even 5% of the plantation industry, because the plantation industry is made up of 30% larger corporates and 70% what we call smallholders. Smallholders are, farmers who actually pluck their own leaf and sell it to the factories. Now, how can we, sort of as entrepreneurs use technology to really help that whole supply chain, so we can share more with the pluckers along the way because we're more efficient, right? Or train them or teach them how they could farm better, or share, like invest technology with them, partner with them to produce better tea so we can get higher prices, right? All that work has to happen.
Lovely, Rehan. Imran, I'm sure you have something to add on that front. And we're running out of time. So Imran, after adding on, I'm going to invite each of you to perhaps issue a closing call to action for all of us listening in. So Imran.
So adding on to what Rehan said, I mean, that's a brilliant initiative that his company has started. If I take our 50-year history, we've never really sort of been actively involved in that end of the supply chain. So it's difficult for me to comment on the initiatives I think that would help starting at the very inception of the supply chain, which is the plucker. Having said that, in recent years we have made a small, I wouldn't say transition, but as part of our diversification of our tea portfolio, we have engaged in a lot more fair trade initiatives and Rainforest Alliance with our key European customers. And that's in many ways given me a lot more perspective and appreciation for a lot of the work that goes in at the very start of the tea manufacture process. So much so that I went out and saw a lot of plantations myself, and one or two organic plantations as well. Spent some time understanding the differences in the process. And like Rehan said, it really is a case of seeing actual trickle down economics at play. Like that's what we want to see. It starts with the worker, and we've seen different companies introduce different initiatives to do their part in this, and very often with schemes like Fair Trade and Rainforest Alliance Group, we do pay a premium for the tea we source, with the genuine belief that the extra amount we're paying per kilo goes to the betterment of the workers. And this entire process is basically we are held accountable to it through a rigorous auditing process. And I think this has very much been driven by customer trends. It's not only in tea and coffee. In the European market, which I spend a lot of time on now, there is a genuine expectation. People want to know that the brands they're interacting with are responsible, do care about the entire supply chain, and are doing their part. So going forward, one of the plans I have is to, of course, have more internally generated initiatives that address this very core issue, without it always being something external. So I think for us, this is a very, very new area which hasn't been looked at to a large degree, but in time to come and in the very near future, it will be a very big part of our plans.
Well, you know, I wish we had a lot more time for this because we had intended to talk about tea innovation and we ended up talking about management and mindsets and caring about the livelihoods and well-being of our growers. And I love the direction we have taken. And I think that's echoed in the Q&A channel as well by Gautam. So Rehan and Imran, do check out the comments. There are some encouraging ones for you in the Q&A channel. But with that, could each of you maybe give a 1 to 2 liner call to action in order for the good work that you have been doing and as an industry to proceed further? What is your call to action to the people listening today, wherever they may be along the supply chain?
I think I would like to just say, don't be scared to innovate.
Wonderful, short and crisp. And Imran?
I don't know if I can be as short and crisp. I think the message I'd like to share with others in the industry is that you know, we in the tea industry are constantly reminded of why things can't be done differently. We're constantly reminded of the status quo and why it's important. And it starts right from your very first day in training. And I think now there's if we look back at the last 3 months, there is no better living proof that that's not the case. And there is scope for change. Things can be radically changed. We did it when we were forced to. So why can't we do it when there's a genuine drive and will and determination to do something from within? So I think there's plenty of optimism in the industry now, and I think I'd like to see a new wave of entrepreneurs in the tea industry emerge, in the post-COVID era, which people who would have maybe not initially may have initially only had the idea, but never had the drive to actually make that bold step. So.
Wow.
Yeah, like Rehan said, don't be afraid to innovate. Yeah.
Absolutely. So in short, COVID was the crisis none of us wanted. So let's not waste the crisis and the many opportunities that's opened for us for innovation. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rehan. Thank you so much, Imran. I think we can all agree that this has been wonderful. I think somebody is asking if you're open to sharing your company email IDs.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So if that's the case, we will include that in the chat later. So thank you for being generous with your sharing. And